The 53rd floor of Hayes Capital Partners hummed with the particular silence that only Manhattan skyscrapers knew after midnight, a low mechanical drone of HVAC systems breathing through empty halls, punctuated by the distant whine of elevator cables somewhere in the building's core. James Sullivan Morrison had the entire M&A division to himself, which was exactly how he preferred these late Thursday sessions. His daughter Iris slept safely across the river in Dumbo, with his sister Margot. His cold coffee sat forgotten beside a half-eaten bagel from 14 hours ago, and the spreadsheet glowing on his dual monitors told a story that required absolute concentration. $600 million hung on whether the biotech target company's intellectual property portfolio could survive regulatory scrutiny in 3 jurisdictions simultaneously. The number said yes. His instinct said maybe. The memo he was drafting for the partnership committee said proceed with caution and additional due diligence on the European patents. 3 years at Hayes Capital had taught James that analysts who stayed invisible lasted longest. He arrived before the senior partners delivered flawless work and left without drawing attention to the careful machinery of his life. The sister who picked up Iris from PS 321 on late nights, the standing Tuesday morning meetings with his daughter's teacher, the precise choreography that kept a 7-year-old fed and stable and loved, while her father built something that resembled security from the wreckage of a marriage that had imploded when she was barely old enough to remember it. Rebecca had wanted more than a 2-bedroom rental in Astoria and a husband who came home smelling like anxiety and instant ramen. She'd found it in a venture capitalist named Marcus, something who lived in Tribeca and drove a Tesla, and apparently understood that life was supposed to be bigger than small moments and careful budgets. 4 years had passed since she'd left, and James had learned that protecting Iris meant building walls high enough that no one could climb over and disappear again. He was 34 years old, lean in the way that men get when they forget to eat properly, with the kind of face that made people look past him in meetings until he spoke, and they realized he'd already seen 3 moves ahead. His father, Patrick, had been a union electrician in Queens, who taught him that good work spoke for itself and keeping your head down kept you employed. The heart attack that killed Patrick at 52 had taught James something darker, that showing up and doing right didn't guarantee anything except that you'd shown up and done right. His mother had died 2 years later, and by then James was 24 with an economics degree from Queens College. No family except his sister Margot, and a deep wariness about building anything that couldn't be carried in one suitcase if the ground opened beneath his feet. The elevator chime cut through his concentration like a blade. Security made rounds, but never this high, and the last analyst had packed up around 9. James glanced at the glass doors separating the executive suite from the bullpen, where junior staff clustered in their identical pods, expecting the blue uniform of building security. Instead, Catherine Alexandra Hayes stepped into view, and everything about the moment felt wrong in ways that made his pulse spike. She wasn't wearing the armor, no sharp-shouldered Armani blazer, no Louboutin heels that clicked like a countdown to judgment. Dark jeans that actually looked like she'd owned them for years, a cashmere sweater, the color of charcoal, flat leather boots that made no sound on the polished concrete. Her blonde hair fell loose past her shoulders instead of being tortured into the sleek twist she wore like a helmet in board meetings. She looked 41 instead of ageless. She looked tired. She looked human. James's first instinct screamed at him to close the laptop, grab his jacket, and make it to the elevator before she noticed him. 3 years of carefully maintained professional distance, respectful nods in hallways, crisp responses in conference calls, exactly 0 personal conversations beyond weather, and Met's scores had kept him safely in the category of competent and forgettable. Whatever brought Catherine Hayes back to the office at 11 on a Thursday night was the kind of crisis that destroyed careers just for witnessing it. But she'd already seen him, and the look on her face wasn't the calculated control he'd observed from a safe distance for 36 months. It was something closer to relief. Her voice carried across the empty floor with surprising steadiness. James is not Morrison, James. His chest tightened around the bagel and coffee and 3 years of careful invisibility. She changed direction, walking toward his desk with purpose, and he stood automatically because his father's ghost wouldn't let him stay seated when a woman approached. The motion felt like surrender. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the fatigue around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped her phone like it might escape if she loosened her hold. The silence stretched between them until she broke it with words that made his carefully constructed world tilt sideways. I need you to help me fix my dating profile. And no, this isn't about work. For a long moment, James simply stared at her, running calculations that had nothing to do with financial models. Catherine Hayes was asking her senior analyst for dating advice at 11 at night in an empty office tower, and every alarm system his divorce had installed started screaming at once. This was the moment to make an excuse. Sister waiting, Iris had school tomorrow. An early meeting. All true, all valid, all lies compared to the actual reason, which was that whatever came next would breach every wall he'd built, and walls existed for reasons written in scar tissue. The word came out anyway, all right. Something shifted in her posture, tension releasing by degrees. She glanced around the empty floor as if checking for witnesses, then gestured toward his desk. Can we sit? He indicated the visitor chair. Herman Miller Ergonomics $600 of corporate comfort, and she took it while he lowered himself back into his own worn seat, feeling the strangeness of the inversions settle over them like sediment. CEOs didn't sit in analysts at cubicles. They didn't show up at midnight looking uncertain. They definitely didn't preface conversations by announcing they weren't work-related. Catherine set her phone on his desk, screen down. I'm going to say something, and I need you to not immediately think I've lost my mind. James kept his expression neutral, through decades of practice reading his daughter's moods. Okay, I need help with my dating profile. The absurdity of it hit him fresh, and he had to replay the words to confirm he had heard correctly. Your dating profile. Not a question, just verification. Yes. Her mouth twitched towards something that might have been a smile in different circumstances. I have a dating profile. Are you surprised? Surprise didn't cover it. Catherine Hayes was a self-made billionaire who'd built Hayes Capital from nothing after the 2008 financial crisis, who sat on Fortune 500 boards and got called to testify before Senate committees about market regulation. Forbes had dubbed her the Ice Queen of Wall Street in a profile last year that James had read 3 times, trying to understand how someone who'd grown up in a trailer in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, became one of the most powerful women in finance. The profile hadn't mentioned dating. Office gossip never touched her personal life. She existed in a category beyond normal human needs, like companionship or loneliness. James chose his words with the care he usually reserved for merger documents. I'm not surprised you're looking. I'm surprised you're asking me. You're direct. You don't sugarcoat things. And you're one of the few people here who doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass or money. She paused, and her next words came quieter. I need honest, and I think you're capable of that. The assessment landed with unexpected weight. 3 years of invisibility, and she'd noticed something true about him, or true about the shell he showed the world, which amounted to the same thing. He'd never been intimidated by her the way others were. Respectful, absolutely. Cautious, always. But fear required investment in outcomes beyond keeping your head attached and your daughter fed, and James had stopped investing in anything that couldn't fit in the 2-bedroom apartment in Astoria, where Iris kept her collection of library books about marine biology and space exploration. What kind of help? He asked. Catherine picked up her phone, unlocked it with a gesture that suggested muscle memory, and handed it across the desk. The screen showed a profile on the League, one of those high-end dating apps where membership required references and background checks and cost more monthly than most people spent on groceries. Her profile photo was professional, but warm. Catherine standing against the sunset skyline, smiling slightly, looking confident and composed in a way that probably intimidated every man who saw it. He scrolled through the text beneath Catherine 41, CEO Manhattan, looking for someone intellectually curious, ambitious, and comfortable with success. I value honesty, independence, and meaningful conversation. No games, no drama. If you can't keep up, swipe left. Interests, economics, art collecting, international travel, fine dining. James read it twice, then set the phone down and met her eyes across the desk. You want the truth? That's why I'm here. It's perfect. He watched her blink, confusion replacing the guarded hope. Then why am I not getting any matches I actually want to meet? The question hung between them, fragile and loaded with a vulnerability that felt dangerous to acknowledge. James leaned back in his chair, choosing each word like picking his way through a minefield. Because it's not a dating profile. It's a job posting. The silence that followed held its breath. Catherine didn't flinch, didn't get defensive. She just watched him with the kind of focus she probably brought to boardrooms when billion-dollar deals hung in the balance, waiting for him to explain how he'd just taken a knife to the careful presentation she'd constructed. "You're telling people what you require, not who you are," he continued. "It's a list of qualifications." The tone, he paused, picking through the diplomatic options and discarding them all. "It's not warm, it's a warning." A warning. She repeated the word like she was tasting it. "Yeah, if you can't keep up, swipe left." That's not inviting. It's a challenge. The whole thing reads like you're interviewing candidates for a position, not looking for a connection. He watched her process this, saw something shift behind her eyes. People don't fall for resumes. They fall for truth, the kind that makes you human, not the polished version you present to shareholders. Catherine picked up her phone again, staring at the profile she'd written like she was seeing it for the first time. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge of recognition. "So what you're saying is I sound like myself." "You sound like the version of yourself you bring to board meetings," James corrected. "The one who's in control, who doesn't need anyone, who's untouchable. And that might be what you want professionally, but if you're trying to meet someone who sees past the title," he trailed off, shrugging, "that's not the kind of honesty that builds bridges." She set the phone down with deliberate care. "What kind does—" James didn't answer immediately because the question cut deeper than profiles and apps and the performance of vulnerability that modern dating seemed to require. He hadn't dated since the divorce, hadn't had time or energy or interest beyond the careful machinery of raising Iris alone. But he remembered what it had been like before Rebecca decided their life was too small, the way she'd looked at him across the table at the Italian place in Astoria, where they'd had their first date, the way conversation had flowed like water finding its level, the feeling that someone saw past the careful defenses to something worth keeping. "Honesty," he said finally. "Not the polished kind, the stuff that makes you human." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, and in the overhead fluorescence that turned everyone gray, she looked less like the Ice Queen of Wall Street and more like someone who'd been alone long enough to forget what warmth felt like. "Show me. Show you what— how to write it honestly." James shook his head, feeling the ground shift beneath a conversation that had already crossed too many lines. "Ms. Hayes, I don't think this is a good idea." "Catherine." Her voice carried quiet insistence. "If we're doing this, call me Catherine." The name felt wrong in his mouth, too intimate, too much like acknowledging that this wasn't a work conversation happening in a professional space, but something else entirely. "Catherine," he tried, and heard how it changed the air between them. "This is crossing a line. I work for you. This is—" He gestured vaguely between them, searching for words that wouldn't make it worse. "It's not appropriate. The line is me asking you to do work you're not paid for," Catherine said calmly. "This is me asking a favor from someone whose judgment I trust. You can say no. I won't hold it against you. But I'm not ordering you, James. I'm asking." She said it simply, without pressure, and James believed her. He could say no. He could stand up, wish her luck, and return to the safety of spreadsheets and carefully maintain distance. But he didn't move, couldn't quite explain why. Except that something in her voice, the loneliness he recognized, because he carried the same weight home every night and tucked it away where Iris wouldn't see, made the risk seem less terrifying than the alternative. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's rewrite it." Catherine pulled her chair closer to his desk, and James opened a notes app on his phone, fingers hovering over the screen. "Start over. Forget the profile you wrote. Forget what you think people want to hear. Just tell me about yourself. The real stuff." She looked at him skeptically. "Like what?" "Like what you do when you are not working." "I'm always working." "You're not working right now?" He watched the corner of her mouth twitch towards something almost like a smile. She conceded the point with a slight nod. "I read old novels mostly, 19th century, Austen, Eliot, the Brontes. I know it sounds cliché coming from a female CEO, but I like the language, the way they built entire worlds out of drawing rooms and letters. It's—" she paused, searching. "It's deliberate, slow, nothing like my life." James typed that in, paraphrasing. "What else?" "I make tea. Strong black tea, first thing every morning. Assam or English breakfast. I stand by the window. My apartment has floor-to-ceiling windows looking over Central Park, and I drink it while the city wakes up. It's the only time the place feels quiet, before the world starts wanting things from me. He added that, watching her face as she talked. The careful control she wore like armor was slipping by degrees, revealing someone who'd learned to translate vulnerability into corporate speak until she'd almost forgotten the original language. Do you live alone? Yes. Do you like it? Catherine hesitated, and in that pause, James saw something raw and unguarded. I'm used to it. That's not the same as liking it, but it's the truth. He typed, looking for someone to share the quiet moments with. Then asked, what else? What do you do to unwind? I cook. Pasta, usually from scratch. It's repetitive and precise, and I don't have to think about anything except getting the dough right, making something with my hands instead of my mind. She watched him type, then added, that probably sounds ridiculous. Billionaire CEO makes pasta like some kind of domestic fantasy. It sounds honest, James said. That's what we're after. He looked up from the screen. What do you want, not in a partner's resume, in a person? The question landed between them with more weight than James had intended. Catherine went very still, and when she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to something almost inaudible beneath the building's mechanical breathing. I want someone who doesn't need me to be impressive. Someone who sees me and doesn't flinch from what they find. Someone who, she stopped, drew breath, continued. Someone who isn't performing all the time. Who can sit in silence without filling it with noise or expectations or agendas. Someone real. James stopped typing. He looked at her, really looked the way you might study a balance sheet to find the story buried in the numbers, and saw past the careful presentation to the truth she was offering. This wasn't about fixing a profile. It was about being seen after spending decades invisible behind the fortress of success. Okay, he said, then say that. They worked for another 20 minutes, stripping away the corporate language and requirements and defensive posturing. What emerged was simpler, warmer, infinitely more vulnerable than what she'd written. Catherine, 41, Manhattan. I spend my days building things and my evenings trying to remember how to slow down. I read old novels because the language matters, make tea at sunrise for the silence, and cook pasta from scratch when I need to think. I'm looking for someone who values quiet connection over loud gestures. Someone who doesn't need me to be anything other than myself. If you're comfortable with silence and honest conversation, we might get along. James handed her the phone. Catherine read it twice, and something complicated moved across her face. Recognition and resistance fighting for territory. This doesn't sound like me. It sounds exactly like you, just not the version you show everyone else. He held her gaze, refusing to let her retreat behind the walls she knew better than her own pulse. That's the point. She saved the draft without publishing it, setting the phone down with the kind of care usually reserved for unstable compounds. Then she leaned back in the visitor chair, studying him with an intensity that made the empty office feel smaller. Can I ask you something? You've been asking me things for the last half hour. Something personal. James tensed every instinct, screaming warnings about lines and consequences and the careful distance that kept people safe. Maybe. Are you seeing anyone? No? Why not? The question was direct but not invasive curiosity without judgment. James considered deflecting, giving some bland answer about being busy with Iris and work. But she'd been honest with him about loneliness and fear and the apartment that felt beautiful and empty. It seemed only fair to return the favor, even if honesty meant admitting things he rarely acknowledged to himself. I have a daughter, she's 7. Her mother and I divorced 4 years ago, and Iris has been through enough without me bringing someone new into her life who might not stay. He met Catherine's eyes, saw understanding there instead of pity. So I don't date. That's practical, not lonely. And before you say it, I know those aren't mutually exclusive. Catherine tilted her head slightly, and the overhead lights caught strands of gray threading through the blonde she probably spent a fortune maintaining. What about you? Why not? Why dating apps? The small smile that touched her mouth held no humor. Because I'm 41 and I've built everything I set out to build. The company's worth over $2 billion. I sit on boards. Forbes writes profiles. And when I go home at night, the apartment is beautiful and empty, and I realize there's no one to share any of it with. She paused, and her next words came quieter. I thought maybe it was time to try more. before I forget how. Something in that admission settled between them, heavy with the weight of years spent building walls against exactly this kind of connection. James felt his throat tighten around words, he had no business saying to his boss at midnight in an empty office. I think you'll find someone. If you use that profile, I think you will. Catherine looked at him for a long moment, and James couldn't quite read what moved behind her eyes, something between hope and skepticism, calculation and surrender. Then she stood picking up her phone with movements that suggested she was already rebuilding the armor. Thank you for your honesty and your time. You're welcome. She started toward the elevator, heels silent on the concrete, and James turned back to his monitors where the biotech merger still waited for his analysis. He'd almost convinced himself the conversation had ended when her voice cut through the mechanical hum. James? He looked up to find her paused at the glass doors, backlit by the emergency exit lights. Yes, you should date. You're smart, kind, and a good father. Someone would be lucky to have you in their life. She said it matter-of-factly, like stating market analysis rather than something that might cost them both. Don't let fear make your decisions for you. Before James could formulate a response that wouldn't crack the careful foundation of professional distance, she stepped into the elevator and was gone. He sat in the empty office for a long time after that, staring at the space where she'd been wondering what the hell had just happened and why his carefully constructed walls suddenly felt less like protection and more like a prison he'd built one brick at a time. 2 weeks passed before James saw Catherine again outside the structured choreography of conference calls and hallway nods. The biotech merger moved toward closing, consuming his days with due diligence and regulatory filings. He thought about her, sometimes wondered if she'd published the new profile, if it had worked, if she'd met someone who could see past the Ice Queen armor to the woman who made tea at sunrise and cooked pasta to quiet her mind. But he didn't ask, didn't follow up, didn't acknowledge that the midnight conversation had happened at all. It felt safer that way, like if he ignored the moment, it might evaporate into one of those strange dreams that Manhattan produced when you stayed too long at the office. Then his phone buzzed with a message from Catherine's assistant on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Mrs. Hayes would like to see you in her office at 5:00 p.m. Please confirm. James confirmed with thumbs that felt clumsy on the screen, his stomach nodding in ways that had nothing to do with the merger or his performance or any legitimate business reason for a private meeting with the CEO. He ran through the last 2 weeks of work in his mind, searching for mistakes or oversights, but nothing stood out. His reports had been thorough. He hadn't missed deadlines. The merger was on track, which meant this was either about something he'd done wrong in ways too subtle to recognize, or it was about something else entirely. At 5, he took the elevator to the executive floor, knocked on Catherine's door, and heard her voice. Come in. She was sitting at her desk, not the performative standing by the window pose she adopted for intimidation, just working through emails like a normal human with too much responsibility. She looked up when he entered and gestured to the chair across from her. Close the door. James did, then sat down waiting. The silence stretched just long enough to make his pulse spike before Catherine spoke. The profile worked. He processed that, keeping his tone carefully neutral. That's good. I've been on 4 dates in the last 2 weeks. She leaned back in her chair and frustration creased her face in ways that probably never showed in board meetings. They were all perfectly nice, intelligent, successful, exactly what I said I was looking for. A lawyer who clerked for the Second Circuit, a banker from Credit Suisse, an entrepreneur who'd sold his startup for 8 figures, a CEO of a biotech company. James felt something cold settle in his chest. And none of them felt real. Catherine's voice carried an edge of something that might have been desperation or anger or both. It was like they showed up with their own profiles memorized, asked the right questions, said the right things, laughed at the right moments. The whole time I kept thinking. She stopped, and the silence filled with things James knew he shouldn't want to hear. I kept thinking I'd rather be talking to you. The air in the room shifted, pressure dropping like before a storm. James felt his pulse spike, every warning bell his divorce had installed going off at maximum volume. This was the moment to stand up, make an excuse, leave before the conversation went somewhere neither of them could come back from. but his body refused the command, frozen in the visitor chair, while his mind raced through implications and consequences, and the very good reasons why what Catherine was suggesting, if she was suggesting anything at all, would destroy everything he'd carefully built. His voice came out tight when he finally managed words. "Ms. Hayes, I told you to call me Catherine." Not a request, a correction. Catherine. The name still felt dangerous in his mouth. "I think you should be careful what you're saying." "I'm always careful." Something in her face shifted, walls crumbling by degrees. "That's the problem. I've been careful my entire life. It's kept me safe. It's also kept me alone." James shook his head, fighting the part of him that wanted to stop being careful for once, to see what happened if he stepped off the ledge. We can't." "I'm not asking you to do anything," Catherine said quietly, and the lack of pressure somehow made it worse. "I'm just telling you the truth. You said people fall for honesty, so I'm being honest. The profile you helped me write worked. I met interesting people, and the whole time I was out with them, all I could think about was the person who helped me write it, who saw through my bullshit, who made me feel seen for the first time in years." The confession landed between them with the weight of admission that couldn't be taken back. James felt his carefully maintained professional distance crumbling brick by brick under the honest weight of her words. "Why?" The question came out sharper than he intended. "Why me?" "You don't know, but we've had one real conversation. I know you're the only person in this building who talks to me like I'm a person, not a title," Catherine said. "I know you're thoughtful and direct. You don't say things you don't mean. You care more about doing good work than getting credit for it." She paused, gathering herself. "And I know you understand what it's like to be lonely, even when you're surrounded by people. I saw it that night. The way you talked about not dating to protect your daughter. You know what it costs to be careful." Something cracked open inside James's chest, something he'd kept sealed for 4 years, since the day Rebecca walked out saying she needed more than he could give. He'd convinced himself that being alone was practical, that protecting Iris from instability was worth his own loneliness, that safety mattered more than the risk of being seen. But Catherine was right. He did know what it cost. And sitting across from this formidable woman who just admitted she'd rather talk to him than the successful men she dated, he wondered if the cost had finally gotten too high. "This is a bad idea," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Probably." Catherine's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But I'm tired of good ideas that leave me sitting alone in an empty apartment." "Aren't you?" James thought about his own apartment in Astoria, the routines he'd built, the walls he'd carefully constructed, Iris asleep in her room, reading about hammerhead sharks and their 360-degree vision. He thought about the quiet, manageable life that kept them both safe. And he thought about what Catherine had said to him that night. "Don't let fear make your decisions for you." "I have a daughter," he said, and heard how it sounded like his last line of defense, because that's exactly what it was. "If this goes wrong, and it probably will, it's not just me who gets hurt. Iris has already lost her mother. She doesn't need to watch her father get destroyed because he made a stupid choice." "I know that." Catherine leaned forward, resting her arms on her desk. "I know what you're risking. But I also know what I'm risking: my company, my reputation, everything I've built. I'm not doing this lightly, James. I'm doing it because I looked at every profile, went on every date, and kept him comparing them to the person who helped me write the damn thing. And I realized I don't want someone who checks boxes. I want someone who sees me. You do that. You saw me when I didn't even see myself." The words hung between them, honest and terrifying and absolutely true. James closed his eyes, feeling himself standing at the edge of something vast, where one step forward meant no going back. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to choose safety, to protect Iris and himself from the wreckage that seemed inevitable. But when he opened his eyes, Catherine was still there, looking at him with an expression equal parts hope and fear, and he realized he was tired of stepping back from everything that mattered. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. Not refusal, admission. "Neither do I." Catherine's voice softened. "But maybe we figure it out together." James took a breath, let it out slowly, felt the ground shift beneath years of careful distance. Then he said the word that would change everything. "Okay." It hung in the air between them, fragile and enormous. Catherine smiled, really smiled, for the first time since he'd met her, and James felt something settle into place inside him. Something he hadn't known was missing until this formidable woman had asked him to help fix her dating profile, and he'd been honest enough to tell her the truth. Okay, she repeated, and the words sounded like a promise and a question and the beginning of something neither of them knew how to navigate. But as James left her office and took the elevator back down to the analyst's floor, where his monitors still glowed with merger documents, he realized that for the first time in 4 years, he wanted to find out. The risk seemed worth it. She seemed worth it. And maybe, just maybe, he was tired of living, careful enough to try being brave instead. But first he had to tell Iris. First, Catherine had to navigate the board politics that would explode if anyone suspected what was happening. First, they had to figure out how to be together without destroying everything they'd built separately. First came everything that would test whether this moment of connection could survive contact with reality. But as James settled back into his work, he found himself checking his phone more often than necessary, wondering when she'd text, hoping she would. The message came 2 days later, Thursday afternoon, when James was deep in reviewing European patent classifications for the biotech merger. I'm restructuring the M&A division, creating a new role, Director of Strategic Analysis. It would report directly to the partnership committee, not to me. I'm recommending you for it. Board meets next Tuesday to approve. James stared at the words, pulse pounding in his ears, loud enough to drown out the office noise. She was creating a position that would remove the direct reporting relationship between them, making it possible for whatever this was to exist without violating company policy. But she hadn't asked him first, hadn't discussed whether he wanted the promotion or the exposure it would bring. She just decided move the pieces on the board, and now he had to react. His fingers hovered over the screen, mind racing through implications. A promotion meant visibility. It meant Derek Brennan and the other partners would scrutinize his work. It meant people would ask questions about why, now why him, whether he'd earned it or just been convenient. It meant risk at exactly the moment when he was already taking the biggest risk of his life. But it also meant Catherine was fighting for them and putting her reputation on the line, creating space where they could exist without technically breaking rules. She was making this real instead of theoretical, choosing action over fear. He typed, "When were you planning to tell me?" Hit send before he could second guess. Her response came within seconds. "I'm telling you now. Board hasn't voted yet. You can say no. But James, you've earned this. Your track record speaks for itself. This isn't favoritism. It's recognition." Another message followed immediately, and yes, it also solves our problem. But those things aren't mutually exclusive. You taught me that. James sat with his phone in his hand, watching the cursor blink in the text field, trying to formulate a response that captured everything churning in his chest: relief and fear and gratitude and terror. The sense that Catherine was already 3 moves ahead, planning for contingencies he hadn't considered. The realization that she was right, he had earned this, his work was flawless. And if anyone questioned it, they'd have to explain why 3 years of perfect performance suddenly didn't count. He typed, "If people figure out there's something between us, this will look like exactly what Derek Brennan thinks it is." Catherine, then we don't give them anything to figure out. We're careful, professional. No one needs to know until you're established in the role. James, and after that, the cursor blinked for almost a minute before her response appeared. "After that, we see if this is worth the fight. If it is, we fight. If it's not, at least you got a promotion out of it." He almost laughed at the calculated pragmatism, the way she couldn't quite let herself be vulnerable, even in text messages. But beneath the joke, he heard the real question. Do you think this is worth fighting for? Are you willing to risk everything on? Maybe James looked around the office where he'd spent 3 years being invisible and careful and safe. He thought about Iris, about the life they'd built in Astoria, about all the reasons to say no. Then he thought about Catherine standing in that empty office at midnight, asking for help because she was lonely enough to risk being honest with someone who might judge her for it. Thought about her smile when he'd said okay, the way it had transformed her face from formidable to human. He typed, "Okay, let's do this. But Catherine, we have to be smart about it. For Iris, for your company, for both of us." Her response came immediately. "Agreed. Dinner this weekend." Somewhere no one from the office goes. James, somewhere in Brooklyn. I know a place, Catherine. Send me the address. I'll be there. He sent her the details for Lilia in Williamsburg, a neighborhood Italian place where finance people never ventured, and the food was good enough to justify the subway ride. Then he closed the text thread and returned to the patent analysis, forcing his mind back to work, even as his pulse still hammered with adrenaline and fear, and something that might have been hope if he was willing to name it. The board meeting happened on Tuesday, and James wasn't invited. Catherine presented the restructuring as a response to 40% year-over-year growth in the M&A division, the need for dedicated strategic leadership, the way clients were being turned away because they didn't have bandwidth. She made the case for James using his track record, 12 successful deals, over 3 years, average deal size $450 million, 0 mistakes, client retention at 98%. She highlighted his ability to translate complex financial structures into language that CEOs without finance backgrounds could understand, the way boards responded to his presentations, his forensic attention to detail that had saved clients millions. Thomas Wright voted yes immediately. Margaret Townsend asked smart questions about compensation and reporting structure, then voted yes. Howard Klein, the board chairman, studied the proposal for what felt like an eternity before nodding approval. Robert Fitzgerald and Stephen Lancaster followed quickly. That left Julia Whitmore and Derek Brennan. Julia, who chaired the ethics committee, asked the question everyone was thinking. This is expensive, Catherine. $400,000 annually for a new position. Why James Morrison specifically? We have other senior analysts with comparable track records. Catherine had her answer ready. Morrison has something the others don't, the ability to see patterns 3 moves ahead. Last quarter, he identified a regulatory issue in the Singapore subsidiary of a target company that our legal team missed, saved the client $200 million in potential fines. He's not just executing deals. He's preventing disasters before they happen. That's worth the investment. The room absorbed this. Julia made a note, then nodded. Derek Brennan, the newest partner at 38 with Harvard MBA credentials and political instincts, sharp enough to cut, leaned back in his chair with studied casualness. Timeline seems convenient, he said. His voice carried no accusation, just observation. We've been discussing growth challenges for months. Suddenly there's budget for a new senior role, and Morrison is the obvious choice. Has there been any recent communication between you and Morrison that might have influenced this decision? The question landed like a grenade with the pin pulled. Catherine didn't flinch. Derek, I presented the restructuring framework to Howard in late August. Morrison and I had a brief conversation about career development in early September, but the role design was already in progress. If you're suggesting favoritism, you're welcome to review my emails. The timeline is clear. Derek held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. Not suggesting anything, just ensuring due diligence. These things matter. He paused, then added, I vote yes, but I recommend a mandatory 6-month performance review. Make sure Morrison delivers at this level. Howard Klein seized the compromise. Seconded, all in favor of the restructuring with 6-month review. The vote passed 7-0. Catherine had won, but Derek's question hung in the air like smoke after a fire. He suspected something, maybe not the full truth, but enough to be watching. And Derek Brennan, from what James had observed over 3 years, was the kind. The first date happened on Saturday evening in Williamsburg at a corner table Lilia kept for regulars who knew to call ahead and request privacy. Catherine arrived early, which James noticed when he walked in at 7, exactly punctuality, being one of those habits his father had drilled into him before the heart attack. She changed from whatever she wore during the day into a simple black dress and gray cardigan, hair down again, and when she looked up from her wine glass, her eyes held the same uncertainty he felt coiling in his chest. You came. Relief colored her voice. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. This week gave you plenty of time to reconsider. She watched him settle across from her, the table small enough that their knees almost touched. The board approved your promotion. Unanimous vote. You start in 2 weeks after they finalize compensation and reporting structure. James had received the official email Thursday morning, congratulations paperwork, to follow transition plan with his replacement. Reading it had felt surreal, like watching someone else's career advance while his own stayed safely invisible. Except it was his career now, his name on the new org chart, his face that would be in partnership meetings where Derek Brennan could study him for cracks. Derek voted yes, James said, but he also suggested the 6-month review. He suspects something. Catherine didn't sugarcoat it. Not proof, just instinct. We need to be more careful than careful. The waiter appeared with menus, gave them space. James ordered the pasta tasting menu on Catherine's recommendation, let her choose a Barolo that probably cost more than his monthly rent. When they were alone again, the silence stretched until Catherine broke it with a laugh that sounded like pressure escaping. This is strange. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals without sweating. Now I can't remember how to have dinner with someone I actually want to talk to. We're both out of practice. James found himself relaxing by degrees, the tension in his shoulders easing. When's the last time you did this real date, not business dinner, with someone you're evaluating? Catherine thought about it, and her expression went distant. 5 years, maybe longer. After my father died, I threw myself into work. Dating felt like one more thing to schedule, one more performance to manage. Easier to just not. Your father, James said, remembering the detail from their midnight conversation. You said you weren't speaking when he died. 5 years of silence. He thought I wasted my life chasing money instead of a husband and family. Traditional Pennsylvania steel town values women belong in kitchens, not boardrooms. We fought about it until I stopped calling. Then he got sick and died before I could. She stopped, picked up her wine. Before we could fix anything. That kind of regret doesn't fade. James heard the weight of unfinished business, the way certain losses never healed completely. My father taught me that good work speaks for itself. Keep your head down, do the job, right? Go home to family. He died at 52, electrician's union pension, barely enough to bury him. 25 years of showing up, and he got a heart attack for his trouble. You're like him. Catherine's observation landed softly. The way you work, the way you show up for Iris. I try to be, for her. James paused as food arrived, handmade agnolotti that melted on the tongue, flavor layered with precision. They ate in comfortable silence until he asked, what made you decide to build Hayes Capital? After your divorce, after everything with your father? Spite initially. Her smile held an edge. Marcus, my ex, told me I'd never make it without his connections. That finance was a boys' club, and I was delusional thinking I could compete. So I spent 10 years proving him wrong. Built the firm from nothing after the financial crisis when everyone else was panicking. By the time I realized spite wasn't enough to sustain a life, I'd built something too big to walk away from. And now, James watched her face in the candlelight, seeing past the CEO mask to someone who'd won everything except what mattered. Now I'm 41 and with $2 billion in assets under management and no one to share breakfast with. Success tastes like ashes when you're eating alone. She met his eyes. That's probably the most honest thing I've said to anyone in years. You have that effect. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and true. James felt something shift, recognition that they were both standing at the same precipice, both tired of safety, both terrified of the fall, but willing to jump if someone jumped with them. The rest of dinner passed in conversation that flowed like water, finding its level covering everything from Iris's obsession with marine biology to Catherine's failed attempts at learning Italian to the peculiar loneliness of Manhattan, where you could be surrounded by 8 million people and still feel completely alone. When they left the restaurant just after 10, the October air carried autumn's sharp promise. They walked slowly through Williamsburg's quiet streets, shoulders occasionally brushing, neither willing to end the evening. At the subway entrance, Catherine stopped. I should let you get back. Iris is waiting. Margot has her tonight. Sleepover. James felt his pulse accelerate, aware they were standing at another edge. But I should still. Catherine stepped close and close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that probably had a French name. James, can I? Yes. He didn't wait for her to finish the question, just leaned in and kissed her. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as she made a sound against his mouth that sent heat through his entire body. Her hand came up to his face, fingers gentle, and for a moment the city disappeared into just this lips and breath, and the terrifying relief of finally touching someone who saw past all the careful walls. They broke apart, breathless. Catherine rested her forehead against his, and her voice came out shaky. We're really doing this. Carefully, but yes. James pulled back enough to see her face flushed and uncertain and more beautiful than any Forbes profile had ever captured. If you still want to. I want to so much, it scares me. She kissed him again, quick and sweet. Text me when you get home. Promise, wait. He watched her hail a cab, waited until taillights disappeared into traffic before heading underground. The train back to Astoria felt like floating, his mind replaying every moment from dinner to that first kiss, to the way Catherine had looked at him like he was worth the risk. For the first time since Rebecca left, James let himself imagine that maybe fear wasn't the only valid response to wanting something. Maybe brave was an option too. The text came as he reached his apartment. That was worth waiting for. Thank you for being honest, for seeing me, for not running. See, he typed back, thank you for asking me to fix your dating profile. Best favor I ever did, Jay. Her response made him smile. Best mistake I ever made was working late that Thursday. Sleep well, James Morrison. October became November through a series of stolen moments. Weekend mornings at farmers markets, when Manhattan executives slept off their hangovers, evenings cooking in Catherine's penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed Central Park in gold and crimson, long walks through Brooklyn neighborhoods where no one recognized the Ice Queen of Wall Street. They were careful, bordering on paranoid. No texts during work hours, no lunches together, no leaving the building at the same time. At the office, James settled into his new role reporting to Thomas Wright in the partnership committee instead of Catherine directly, and the distance felt both protective and painful. His work caught attention. The biotech merger closed in early November, with James catching a hidden liability that saved the client $200 million in regulatory fines. Thomas Wright pulled him aside afterward with something like pride in his weathered face. Morrison, that patent analysis was partner-level thinking. You see patterns others miss. The praise settled warm in James's chest, validation that the promotion reflected merit and not just convenient timing. But Derek Brennan noticed too, started attending meetings where James presented, watching with those cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He never said anything directly, just asked pointed questions about methodology and timeline that felt like tests James couldn't afford to fail. Iris asked more questions as November wore on. Daddy's happy lately, smiling more. Why, miss? James, navigating the narrow line between honesty and information she was ready for, kept his answers vague. Work is going well, sweetie. New role means new challenges. Is it the friend, the one you text? She looked up from her homework with that too knowing gaze that came from watching adults lie her entire conscious life. You smile when you text. You never smiled at work texts before. I have a friend I like spending time with. You'll meet her soon, when the time is right. James watched his daughter process this, saw wheels turning behind 7-year-old eyes. Okay, but Daddy, don't get hurt again. I don't like when you're sad. The observation cut deeper than she meant, a reminder that children absorbed adult pain whether parents hid it or not. James pulled Iris into a hug that felt like apology and promise mixed together. I'll be careful, baby. I promise. Margot was less subtle when James picked Iris up the following Tuesday. His older sister cornered him in her kitchen while Iris collected her backpack, voice low enough not to carry. You're seeing someone. Don't deny it, I've known you too long. Is it serious? Might be. James felt protective walls rise automatically. Early still. Good. You deserve happiness, little brother. Just, she paused, choosing words carefully. Make sure she deserves you, and that Iris comes first, always. She does. On both counts. Though even saying it, James felt the weight of balancing Iris's needs against his own, Catherine's career against their relationship, the careful choreography that kept everything from collapsing. Thanksgiving arrived with an invitation that felt more like a test. Margot was hosting, and Catherine asked if she could come meet Iris properly, be part of something family instead of stolen. James said yes before fear could override the decision, then spent 3 days wondering if he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. Thanksgiving morning, he told Iris over pancakes. Catherine is coming to dinner at Aunt Margot's. She'd like to meet you. Iris set down her fork with deliberate care. The friend. Yes, the friend I've been spending time with. James watched his daughter's face, trying to read whether this registered as threat or curiosity. You met her once before, actually. She came to your birthday party in February, brought you that book about octopuses. The CEO lady. Iris's eyes went wide. The one from your work. That's her, Catherine Hayes. James treaded carefully through the minefield of 7-year-old logic. I know it might seem strange, but she's important to me, sweetie. I wanted you two to know each other. Mommy was important to you. Then she left. The statement landed flat and factual, no accusation, just observation from a child who'd learned early that important didn't mean permanent. James felt his chest constrict around the truth of it. Catherine is different from Mommy, but you're right to be careful. You don't have to like her right away. Just give her a chance. Iris considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything from homework to selecting library books. Okay, but Daddy, if she's mean to you or makes you sad, I won't be nice to her. That's not how it works. Deal. He offered his hand for a shake, and Iris took it with her small fingers sealing the bargain. Now finish breakfast. We need to make pie for Aunt Margot. Catherine arrived at Margot's Dumbo brownstone at 3 bearing wine and a gift bag she handed to Iris with careful formality. I heard you're interested in space now. Thought you might like this. Iris opened the bag, slowly extracted a professional-grade telescope that probably cost more than James made in a week. Her eyes went wide, defenses momentarily forgotten in the face of genuine interest. This is real, not a toy. Real. You can see Jupiter's moons, Saturn's rings, maybe nebulae, if we drive outside the city sometime. Catherine knelt to Iris's level, treating her like an adult worth consulting. I remembered you talked about hammerhead sharks in 360-degree vision. At your birthday. Seemed like you're interested in an observation, whether looking down into water or up at stars. Telescope felt like a logical next step. Iris studied Catherine with an intensity that made James's stomach knot. His daughter had Rebecca's wariness and his own tendency to observe before trusting. Whatever conclusion she reached would matter more than board votes or Derek Brennan's suspicions or anything else that threatened from outside this moment. You pay attention, Iris finally said. That's good. Most adults don't. I try. Catherine stood glancing at James with something like relief. Your dad taught me that seeing people matters, really seeing them, not just what they show you. Dinner unfolded with surprising ease, Margot's warmth offsetting the tension, Ben keeping conversation flowing with questions about Hayes Capital that Catherine answered without condescension, Iris watching everything with those calculating eyes. The food was traditional overdone turkey and perfect mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie that Margot had stayed up late perfecting. Over dessert, Iris cornered Catherine in the kitchen while James cleared plates. Can I ask you something? Iris's voice carried through the doorway with painful directness. Of course. Catherine sounded genuinely interested rather than performing adult patience. Are you going to leave like my mom did? The question froze everyone in earshot. James started to intervene, but Margot's hand on his arm stopped him. Let them work this out, her gesture said. Let your daughter protect herself. Catherine's response came quietly enough that James had to strain to hear. I can't promise forever, Iris. Adults can't even when we want to. Sometimes things change. Sometimes people realize they made mistakes. But I can promise this: if I have to leave, it won't be because you or your dad aren't enough. It won't be because I found something better. And I'll tell you before it happens. I won't just disappear. My mom said she needed more than us, more than our apartment and Daddy's job and our life. Iris's voice cracked slightly. She said everything was too small. Are we too small for you? No, Catherine's answer came fast and certain. Iris, I have more, too much more. More money, more pressure, more people wanting things from me. What I need is less. Less noise, less performance, less loneliness. Your dad and you're less in the right way. Simple and real and true. That's not too small. That's exactly what I've been looking for. Silence stretched long enough that James risked looking around the doorframe. Iris stood very still, processing, while Catherine waited without trying to fill the quiet with reassurance. Finally, his daughter nodded once. Okay, you can stay for dessert. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a beginning. Catherine caught James's eye as they returned to the table and The tentative hope in her expression made his chest ache. They were building something fragile here, all three of them, and the foundation still felt uncertain. But it was something. It was trying. December arrived with two things that shattered their careful construction: an email from HR and a formal complaint filed through the ethics hotline. James got the email, first bland corporate speak, requesting a meeting to discuss reporting structures and compliance with governance policies. Catherine received a separate summons. Within hours, everyone at Hayes Capital knew something had detonated, even if the details remained classified. Derek Brennan approached James in the break room with sympathy that felt calculated down to the concerned furrow in his brow. "Tough situation, Morrison. For what it's worth, I hope it's nothing serious." "I'm sure it's routine." James kept his voice neutral, refusing to give Derek the satisfaction of visible worry. "Of course," Derek paused, perfecting the impression of a colleague offering genuine advice. "These things matter. Appearance process, all of it. We're fiduciaries. Client trust is everything. Even the hint of impropriety can damage the firm's reputation. I'm not saying you did anything wrong, just that optics matter as much as reality, sometimes." The reasonable tone made it worse, positioning Derek as the voice of institutional concern rather than personal agenda. James nodded noncommittally and left before his expression could betray what he was thinking about Derek's motivations and what the man actually suspected versus what he could prove. Helen Reeves conducted the interview in a windowless conference room that felt designed to make people confess things. She was 48, competent, and utterly humorless about compliance. Jonathan Kellerman from legal sat beside her, taking notes on a laptop while Helen walked through timeline questions that grew increasingly pointed. "When did your personal relationship with Ms. Hayes begin?" James had rehearsed this, knew the answer needed to be precise enough to be credible without offering ammunition. "We had one conversation in September about a personal matter unrelated to work. After the board approved the M&A restructuring in late October, we began spending time together outside the office. First date was October 20th, 5 days after my role officially changed. But you discussed the possibility of a relationship before the restructuring was finalized." Not a question, a statement. "We discussed the possibility once, but I didn't act on it, didn't pursue it, didn't let it influence my work or Ms. Hayes' decision-making. The restructuring was already in progress before we had that conversation. You can verify the timeline through emails and board documents." Helen made a note. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, lawyer instincts engaging. "Mr. Morrison, you understand how this appears. The timing is convenient. Ms. Hayes proposes a new position that removes your reporting relationship shortly after you begin dating. It creates the perception that the role was created to facilitate your personal relationship. The perception would be wrong." James met Jonathan's gaze without flinching. "I earned this position. My performance record speaks for itself. If Ms. Hayes has feelings for me and I can't speak to her motivations, those feelings didn't influence her professional judgment. The firm needed this role. I was qualified for it. That's what the evidence shows." "Evidence can be interpreted multiple ways," Jonathan observed, "especially when personal relationships are involved." The interview lasted 90 minutes, circling back to the same questions from different angles, probing for inconsistencies or admissions that would confirm whatever theory Helen and Jonathan were building. By the end, James felt wrung out, every answer carefully measured against the ones before, knowing that one contradiction could unravel everything. Catherine's interview happened the following day, and from what she told him later in a terse text after midnight, because they had agreed to no personal contact until the investigation concluded, she'd been more confrontational than cautious. Helen asked if Catherine had created the Director of Strategic Analysis position for James specifically. Catherine said no, the division needed dedicated leadership. James was the best candidate. Jonathan suggested that Catherine's attraction to James might have influenced her judgment, even subconsciously. Catherine responded that attraction was a human experience that didn't shut off in boardrooms, but that her professional decisions remained professional regardless of personal feelings. Then she'd apparently leaned forward and told them something that made Helen's notes pause mid-sentence. "Yes, I'm attracted to James Morrison. He's brilliant, principled, kind. But those qualities also make him excellent at his job. If he weren't qualified, I wouldn't have recommended him no matter how I felt personally. You can check his performance reviews were written by Thomas Wright, not me. His compensation was benchmarked by external consultants. The promotion process was transparent. So unless you're suggesting that women in power can't make objective decisions once they develop feelings for someone, I'd appreciate you focusing on facts instead of insinuations. The statement apparently ended the interview, though not the investigation. December passed in limbo. James and Catherine, avoiding all contact beyond necessary work emails, the office atmosphere shifting as colleagues picked up on the tension and started choosing sides. Some were supportive in quiet ways. Thomas Wright stopping by James's desk to mention that good work always survives scrutiny. Margaret Townsend from the CFO's office saying loudly in the break room that everyone deserved personal happiness, including CEOs. Others went cold. Derek's allies freezing James out of lunch invitations and after-work drinks, making it clear that association with him carried risk. Iris noticed her father's stress, started having nightmares about moving and changing schools. One night in mid-December, she woke up crying, and James held her while she sobbed out fear about everything disappearing again. If you lose your job, do we have to leave our apartment? Do I have to leave PS 321? I don't want to lose my friend's daddy. The conversation with Catherine afterward felt necessary and brutal. James called from his apartment after Iris finally fell back asleep, voice low so he wouldn't wake her. We need to slow down with Iris. She's hearing things at school. Kids say their parents are talking about us. She's scared we're going to have to move, that her life is going to fall apart. I can't let her go through that. Catherine's silence on the other end lasted long enough that James thought the connection had dropped. Then she spoke, and her voice sounded rough. Of course, whatever Iris needs, I understand. It's not that I don't. James stopped, searching for words that wouldn't make it worse. This isn't about us. It's about protecting her. I know, she comes first. She should. Catherine took a breath he could hear over the phone. James, I won't be the reason your daughter suffers. If we need to pause everything until the investigation ends, we pause. I don't want to pause. The admission came out before he could stop it. But I don't know how to balance this, you and Iris in the bus and everything that's at risk. Then we figure it out together, but Iris first, always. Catherine's voice steadied. I'll keep distance until things settle. We'll get through the investigation and then we reassess. Okay. Okay. James felt the weight of the decision settle over him, protective and painful in equal measure. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being a good father. That's one of the things she stopped. One of the things I admire about you. They said goodnight and James sat in the dark of his apartment, wondering how something that felt so right had gotten so complicated so fast. But he'd made the choice Iris needed him to make, and that would have to be enough for now. December 22nd arrived with Helen Reeves calling both James and Catherine separately to deliver findings that somehow felt worse than outright accusations. No policy violations found. The timeline supported their accounts. The relationship had begun after the reporting structure changed. Everything was technically compliant. But the word that followed but landed like a hammer. Timeline raised appearance concerns. Discussions about potential relationship occurred before restructuring was finalized, creating perception of impropriety. And perception mattered in a fiduciary industry where client trust was everything. The proposed solution made James's stomach drop. Enhanced oversight, external consultant reviewing his performance, quarterly mandatory ethics training 4 times a year for both him and Catherine, any raises or bonuses requiring full board approval instead of partnership committee, 18-month probationary period, mandatory disclosure of any relationship status changes within 48 hours. Except the terms or voluntary resignation was implied but not stated. 48 hours to decide. James sat alone in his Astoria apartment that night with a legal pad writing pros and cons like he could solve emotional devastation with analysis. Keep the job meant keeping Catherine and proving the doubters wrong, but it also meant professional stigma, being labeled the guy who dated the boss regardless of merit. Refusing meant protecting his reputation but losing Catherine and probably making it harder to find another position because explaining why you left Hayes Capital after 6 months in a promoted role raised questions. Iris would stay in her school either way, but would she rather have a father who stood on principle or one who fought for what mattered even when it got messy? His phone rang at 1 in the morning. Margot's number. You're awake, I knew it. His sister sounded tired but alert. Talk to me. James, what's really going on? HR investigation. Catherine and I started seeing each other. They can't prove we did anything wrong, but they're implementing oversight to cover the firm's liability. I have 2 days to accept or resign. The summary came out flat, drained of emotion through sheer repetition in his own head. Do you love her? Margot asked. Not like her not enjoy spending time with her. Love her because if this is casual, walk away. But if it's real, you fight. James thought about Catherine standing in his office at midnight asking for help because she was lonely enough to risk honesty. Thought about her needling to talk to Iris at Thanksgiving, promising not to disappear without warning. Thought about her hands shaking when she'd admitted she'd rather talk to him than any of the successful men she'd dated. I think I do. It's fast, but I think it's real. Then fight. But James, Margot's voice carried the weight of older sister authority. Talk to Iris first. She deserves to know what you're risking and why. The conversation with Iris happened over Saturday morning pancakes, careful and age-appropriate, but honest. Something happened at work, sweetie. Daddy has to make a choice. It might mean things change, people talking more, job being harder. But Daddy gets to keep his job and keep seeing Catherine. Iris set down her fork, processing with that serious expression that made her look older than 7. Daddy loves Catherine. James didn't hesitate. Yes, baby, very much. When Mommy left, you were sad a long time. Really sad. I don't want Daddy sad again. She pushed syrup around her plate, not meeting his eyes. Does that mean you should be happy even if it's hard? What do you think? Iris looked up, and wisdom beyond her years shone through the uncertainty. I think Daddy should be happy, because when Daddy's happy, I'm happy, and I like when you smile. James felt tears prick his eyes, carefully hidden. His daughter had just given him permission to risk everything, and the gift of it landed heavier than any board decision or HR finding. Thank you, baby. That helps. Monday morning, he sent the email to Helen Reeves. I accept the enhanced oversight conditions. Effective immediately. Catherine called an emergency board meeting that same day, and the shouting apparently carried through closed doors. She argued that the stigma was excessive, that James had done nothing wrong, that punishing compliance set a dangerous precedent. Derek countered that they were protecting firm reputation, that this was reasonable middle ground between approval and termination. Julia Whitmore sided with Derek. Perception mattered, and Catherine had put the board in a difficult position by developing feelings for someone in her organization, regardless of how carefully she'd managed the technicalities. Howard Kleinever, the pragmatist, pointed out that shareholders were already asking questions, and they couldn't afford the appearance of enabling questionable judgment. The vote upheld HR's decision 6-1, with only Thomas Wright voting against. But Howard pulled Catherine aside afterward with a warning that Thomas reported to James through carefully worded text. Your board seat isn't secure anymore. Shareholders are restless. You've got maybe 12 months to prove this doesn't impact performance. Otherwise, they'll vote you out and install someone else. Someone like Derek. The unspoken implication hung in the air. Christmas passed in strange separation, James and Iris with Margot's family, Catherine alone in her penthouse, choosing isolation over joining his family celebration because it felt inappropriate to insert herself deeper, while James navigated the professional fallout. They texted on Christmas evening, careful and tentative. Catherine sent a photo of sunrise over Central Park with her teacup in the foreground. James responded with Iris using her new telescope to find the moon through Brooklyn light pollution. Simple moments that felt like lifelines across the distance they'd built to survive scrutiny. New Year's Eve brought a phone call at midnight, both of them too aware of the symbolism to ignore it. Happy New Year, James Morrison. Catherine's voice carried through the connection, warm and tired and real. Happy New Year, Catherine Hayes. This year we fight smarter. This year we win. She paused and he heard her breathing. Together. Always. January brought James back to work with something to prove. The enhanced oversight meant every decision scrutinized, every report measured against impossible standards, every client interaction potentially weaponized if it went wrong. Derek Brennan co-led the quarterly reviews with an external consultant named Dr. Patricia Moore, and the combination of Derek's pointed questions and Patricia's forensic accounting background meant James couldn't afford even minor mistakes. He didn't make any. February arrived with the close of an $850 million biotech acquisition that James had led from due diligence through regulatory approval across 3 jurisdictions. The target company had concealed a patent infringement lawsuit pending in European courts, buried in subsidiary filings that most analysts would have missed. James found it flagged at renegotiated purchase terms that saved the client $200 million in potential liability. Thomas Wright pulled him into a conference room afterward with something like pride cutting through his usual reserve. Morrison, that patent analysis is partner-level work. You see patterns 3 moves ahead. That's rare. The validation landed sweet and necessary proof that Merrick could survive, suspicion if the work was good enough. But Derek noticed too started attending more meetings where James presented asking methodology questions that felt designed to undermine confidence. Why this analysis approach? Instead of that one, what assumptions drove the model? Could James walk through the decision tree that led to his conclusions? The questions were reasonable on their surface, but the frequency and tone made it clear Derek was hunting for cracks. Patricia Moore's quarterly review delivered in early March contradicted Derek's skepticism with clinical precision. Mr. Morrison exhibits no favoritism in deal selection, performs consistently above peer group average, demonstrates exceptional integrity in client relationships and internal collaboration. No concerns identified that would warrant continued enhanced oversight beyond standard probationary timeline. Derek's face when Patricia delivered the findings in the partnership committee meeting apparently went cold enough to freeze the Hudson. He didn't argue against the assessment, couldn't argue against documented excellence, but the set of his jaw suggested he wasn't done looking for angles. Iris turned 8 in February with Catherine invited to the small party at Margot's brownstone. She brought a professional-grade telescope that made Iris's eyes go wide with possibilities, not a toy, but an actual instrument for observation. Catherine knelt to Iris's level with the careful respect she brought to all interactions with James's daughter. I remembered you talked about hammerhead sharks and their 360-degree vision. Seemed like you're interested in observation, whether looking into water or up at stars. Thought you might want to expand your field of vision. Iris studied Catherine with calculation that made James's chest tight. His daughter had softened slightly since Thanksgiving, but trust came slow when you had been abandoned once. You remembered what I said months ago. I pay attention to people who matter. Catherine glanced at James, then back to Iris. Your dad taught me that seeing people really seeing them matters more than impressive presentations. I try to practice what he taught me. Later, Iris pulled Catherine to her room for a private conversation that James wasn't invited to join. He tried not to hover, tried to give them space to build whatever relationship might be possible. When they emerged 20 minutes later, Iris looked thoughtful rather than defensive, and Catherine's eyes held cautious hope. What did you talk about? James asked after Catherine left, unable to suppress curiosity about what his daughter had deemed important enough for privacy. Things. Iris's standard deflection. Then after a pause, she's okay, Daddy. I don't hate her, but I'm still watching to make sure she stays. That's fair, James acknowledged, pulling his daughter into a hug. I'm watching too. We protect each other, right? Right. Iris squeezed back small arms, surprisingly strong. But Daddy, I think maybe she's watching too, making sure we're worth staying for. It's not just us deciding. The observation cut through James's assumptions about power dynamics and risk assessment, reminder that Catherine had as much to lose as they did if this imploded. Maybe more her company, her reputation, everything she'd built over 15 years could crumble if the board decided she'd compromise judgment for personal satisfaction. And still she was here showing up for birthday parties and quarterly ethics training and the slow work of earning Iris's trust. That meant something. That meant she was fighting too. March brought Derek's real play into focus during a routine partnership meeting about 5-year strategic planning. The agenda covered growth targets and competitive positioning and operational efficiency, nothing that should have triggered alarms. But 30 minutes in, Derek pivoted with the smoothness of someone who'd been planning this move for months. One item we haven't addressed, succession planning. Catherine, what's your timeline for CEO transition? The room went silent. Catherine's expression flickered through surprise and anger before settling into cold control. I'm 41, Derek. I plan to lead for 15 to 20 more years. Why are you asking? Best practice for companies our size. Fiduciary duty to have succession framework in place. Derek's tone stayed reasonable, concerned colleague rather than threat. not personal, just governance. Recent events demonstrate that personal circumstances can impact judgment unexpectedly. The board should have options if leadership becomes compromised. Thomas Wright half rose from his chair, face reddening. This is a coup attempt. You're using Catherine's relationship as pretext to position yourself as replacement. I'm protecting firm stability. But Derek didn't rise to the accusation, staying measured and professional in ways that made him seem rational while Thomas looked unhinged. If that includes succession planning that benefits me, fine. If not, also fine. But we need a plan regardless. Julia Whitmore, chair of the Ethics Committee, nodded slowly. Derek has a point. Prudent governance requires understanding leadership continuity. The board should discuss this even if the conversation feels uncomfortable. Howard Klein, caught between competing pressures, made the political call. We'll table this for the April board meeting. Give Catherine time to prepare a proposal. Give Derek time to outline his concerns. Then we vote. Catherine's face revealed nothing, but James saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed against the conference table, hard enough to whiten knuckles. Derek had just launched an assault on her position using the investigation as justification, and he'd done it in a form where she couldn't defend herself without looking desperate or vindictive. It was a masterful political move, and it meant the stakes had escalated beyond personal relationship into existential threat to everything Catherine had built. The conversation in Catherine's office that evening felt like strategy session and confessional mixed together. James had come up after hours when the floor emptied, no longer caring if someone saw him enter her space because the pretense had become exhausting. Catherine stood at her window looking over Manhattan lights, and she didn't turn when he closed the door. Derek's going for your job, using us as the excuse, but he's been planning this for months. James kept his voice neutral, analyst presenting findings rather than boyfriend offering comfort. I know. Catherine's voice sounded hollow. I just didn't expect him to move this fast. Thought I'd have more time to rebuild board confidence before he made his play. What are you going to do? She turned finally, and exhaustion lined her face in ways James had never seen. Fight. What else can I do? This is my company. I built it from nothing. I'm not handing it over to Derek Brennan because he's ambitious, and I made the mistake of falling for someone I work with. James crossed to her, close enough to see the fear beneath the anger. Tell me what you need, how I can help. You can't. That's the problem. Catherine's laugh came out bitter. Anything you do to help proves his point that I've compromised judgment, that personal relationships cloud professional decisions. The only way I win is by fighting alone while you stay invisible and perfect so Derek can't use you as ammunition. That's not fair to you. The words came out rougher than intended. You're fighting for us, and I can't even stand beside you. Life isn't fair, James. It's expedient and political and vicious, and sometimes the people you love have to watch you bleed because helping would make it worse. She reached up, touched his face with gentle fingers. I knew the cost when I asked you to fix my dating profile. Knew it would be complicated. I didn't expect it to hurt this much. James pulled her close, feeling her arms come around him, both of them holding on like the pressure could fuse them together strongly enough to survive whatever came next. They stood there while the city glittered below two people who'd been careful their entire lives, now fighting for the right to be reckless together. Catherine pulled back first, wiping her eyes with deliberate motions that restored composure. I'm hiring a private investigator. Need to know what Derek's been doing, if there's anything in his background that explains why he's so fixated on ethics violations. That's playing his game. James felt uneasy creep up his spine, using personal history as leverage. It's due diligence. If he's coming for my position, I need to understand his vulnerabilities. That's not revenge, it's strategy. But her voice held doubt, suggestion that she knew the line between defense and retaliation had already blurred. The investigator, former FBI named Daniel O'Reilly with credentials that cost enough to make James wince, delivered his report 2 weeks later. Derek Brennan had a history that complicated his current crusade for ethical purity. Goldman Sachs' 2018 relationship with a junior analyst named Ashley Monroe. She didn't report to him directly, technically no policy violation, but he'd been her mentor and recommended her for the role. When the relationship became known, Goldman investigated, found no technical wrongdoing, but the stigma followed Derek until he left for Hayes Capital. Ashley Monroe, now a senior portfolio manager at Fidelity, was willing to talk if needed. James read the report with Catherine in her office, and something sick settled in his stomach. This is exactly what happened to us. He's projecting his own guilt onto our situation. Except we actually followed the rules, Catherine corrected. We waited until reporting structures changed. Derek didn't. He mentored someone, recommended her, then dated her while still in position of influence. That's a real ethics violation, not perceived impropriety. Does that make using it against him right? The question came out sharper than intended. Two wrongs don't make this okay. Two wrongs make it even. Catherine's voice hardened. Derek weaponized rules against us. If he has his own history of bending those rules, the board deserves to know. That's transparency, not retaliation. They stared at each other across the desk, and James saw the moment Catherine recognized how she sounded. Cold, calculating. Willing to deploy personal history as ammunition in corporate warfare. It wasn't the woman who'd asked him to help fix her dating profile. It was the ice queen of Wall Street who'd built a billion-dollar firm by being ruthless when necessary. Catherine, he said her name quietly. If we do this, we become the thing Derek's accusing us of being. People who put personal interests above institutional integrity. She looked away, jaw working. Then what's the alternative? Let him win. Watch everything I built get handed to someone who's exactly as compromised as he claims I am. I don't know, but there has to be a path that doesn't require us becoming people we'll hate when this is over. James stood, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Hold that information. Don't use it unless Derek forces your hand, but don't become him just to beat him. Catherine nodded slowly, and when she met his eyes again, something in her expression had shifted back toward the vulnerable woman who'd shown up at midnight looking for help. You're right. I'm scared, James. Scared of losing everything. The company, the board seat, you, Iris. And fear makes me cold. I know. He came around the desk, pulled her up into his arms. We'll figure this out. Together. But we do it without compromising who we are. That's the only way winning actually matters. They held each other while Manhattan's March wind rattled the windows, both knowing the April board meeting would force decisions neither wanted to make. Derek was circling the board, was restless, and somewhere in the complicated math of love and career and protecting what mattered, they'd have to find a formula that didn't destroy them in the solution. The April board meeting convened on a Tuesday morning with the kind of tension that made the air feel thin. James wasn't invited. This was board and senior partners only, but Thomas Wright filled him in afterward with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd watched a carefully planned ambush backfire. Derek had presented his succession planning framework, first 20 slides of corporate governance theory and risk mitigation strategy that boiled down to one argument: Catherine's judgment had been compromised by personal entanglement, and the firm needed contingency leadership ready to step in if shareholders lost confidence. He'd been smooth professional, positioning himself as the concerned steward rather than ambitious usurper. The board had listened with expressions ranging from thoughtful to uncomfortable. Then Catherine had taken the floor. She'd started with facts: firm performance under her leadership, returns that beat industry benchmarks 3 years running, client acquisition and retention numbers that spoke for themselves. She'd moved to the investigation findings. No policy violations, enhanced oversight, producing no concerns, external consultant confirming James Morrison's exceptional performance, independent of any personal connection. Finally, she'd pivoted to the uncomfortable truth everyone was dancing around. Derek raised questions about ethics and institutional integrity. Those are valid concerns. So let's address them directly. Catherine had locked eyes with Derek across the conference table. In 2018, Derek had a relationship with a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs, Ashley Monroe. She didn't report to him directly, but he was her mentor. He recommended her for the analyst position. He provided informal performance feedback that influenced her trajectory. When the relationship became known, Goldman investigated and found technical compliance but significant appearance problems. Derek left Goldman 6 months later, largely because the stigma made his position untenable. The room had gone absolutely silent. Derek's face drained of color, then flushed dark red. I'm not sharing this to attack Derek personally. I'm sharing it because context matters. Catherine's voice stayed level clinical. Derek experienced exactly what James and I are experiencing, scrutiny over a relationship that technically didn't violate policy, but created uncomfortable optics. The difference is that Derek actually was in a mentorship position when his relationship began. James and I waited until reporting structures changed. We followed the rules Derek apparently found too constraining. Derek had exploded, then voice rising in ways that undermined his earlier composure. This is character assassination. You're weaponizing my past to deflect from your own ethical failures. I'm providing context. Catherine hadn't raised her voice at all, which made the contrast more devastating. You positioned yourself as the guardian of institutional ethics, but your own history suggests you understand the gray areas better than you're letting on. If the board wants to discuss leadership continuity, let's discuss it honestly. But let's not pretend that anyone in this room, including you, Derek, has never navigated the complicated intersection of professional and personal life. Julia Whitmore had intervened, then asking the question that cut through the theater. Catherine, why are we only hearing about Derek's Goldman history now? You've had this information for weeks, according to the investigator's date stamp. Why hold it? Because I didn't want to use it. Catherine's admission landed with unexpected weight. I told myself this was about defending against an unjust attack, but James made me see that deploying personal history as ammunition makes us exactly what Derek accused us of being. So I held it. I only brought it forward today because Derek forced a conversation about leadership and ethics, and the board deserves complete information when making those assessments. Howard Klein had called a recess, and the board had deliberated for 90 minutes behind closed doors. When they reconvened, the decision came down with careful precision. Succession planning discussion tabled indefinitely. No current concerns about Catherine's leadership justified immediate planning. Derek's partnership status under review, pending verification of Goldman disclosures during his hiring process. If he'd failed to disclose material information about his departure from Goldman, that constituted grounds for partnership reconsideration. Derek had understood immediately. The board was giving him an exit path that looked voluntary rather than forcing termination that would raise questions. He'd gathered his materials, and delivered his final statement with bitter precision. This firm has compromised its values. I won't be part of it anymore. Consider this my resignation effective immediately. Then he'd walked out, and the board meeting had adjourned in stunned silence. Thomas Wright recounted all of this to James in a lower Manhattan bar, 3 blocks from the office, the kind of place where Wall Street refugees went to process trauma with expensive scotch. The older man's face showed satisfaction, mixed with something darker. Derek had it coming, been positioning himself since the day he made partner. But James, Thomas fixed him with a stare that carried 30 years of corporate warfare. Catherine won, but she paid a price. Using someone's history against them, even justified, changes you. Make sure she doesn't lose herself in the victory. James nodded, already texting Catherine to meet him. She responded immediately. My place, 20 minutes. The penthouse felt different when James arrived, colder, despite the April warmth. Or maybe that was just Catherine standing by her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking over Central Park with a bottle of red wine already half empty. She turned when he closed the door, and her face showed exhaustion beneath the triumph. I won. Derek's gone. Board confidence restored. Everything I wanted. Her voice sounded hollow. So why do I feel like I lost something? James crossed to her, took the wine glass from her hand, and set it down. Because winning by exposing someone's painful history isn't the same as winning on merit. It works, but it costs. I told myself it was defense, not attack. That Derek came for me first, that he weaponized ethics to serve ambition, that turnabout was fair play. Catherine leaned against him, and he felt how tightly she held herself together. But you were right. The moment I decided to use his Goldman history, I became the person I'd been fighting against. Cold, calculating, willing to hurt someone to protect myself. You also held it until he forced your hand. James wrapped his arms around her, offering stability against the guilt. You didn't lead with it. You tried every other option first. That matters. Does it? Derek's career is probably over. Goldman won't take him back. Other firms will hear about this and assume where there's smoke, there's fire. I destroyed him to save myself. She pulled back to look at James, and tears tracked down her face in ways he'd never seen from the Ice Queen of Wall Street. What kind of person does that make me? Human, flawed, fighting for something that mattered more than perfect ethics. He wiped her tears with gentle thumbs. Catherine, you're not a villain for protecting what we built. You're just someone who had to make an impossible choice and pick the least bad option. She kissed him, then desperate and clinging, and James tasted salt and wine and fear. They moved to her bedroom where windows framed Manhattan in 1,000 lights, and for hours they held each other like anchors against the storm. When Catherine finally fell asleep with her head on his chest, James lay awake wondering if relationships that required this much sacrifice could survive what came after the battle ended. May brought different crisis, the kind that cut deeper because it involved Iris. James got the call from PS 321's guidance counselor on a Thursday afternoon. Could he come in to discuss some concerns about Iris's behavior? She'd been withdrawn lately, grades slipping, not engaging with friends the way she usually did. The counselor, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, delivered the information with practiced gentleness that made James's stomach knot. Has anything changed at home? Stress in the family? I know you're a single parent. Is there additional pressure at work, financial concerns? James wanted to laugh at how close to the mark she'd come while missing the actual target. Work has been demanding, but I try to keep that separate from Iris. Children absorb more than we think. They hear conversations, pick up on tension, internalize adult stress as their own problem. Mrs. Patterson pulled out drawings from Iris's art class, and James felt his chest constrict looking at them. Dark colors, isolated figures, one unmistakable sketch of a small girl standing between two adults pulling in opposite directions. This is concerning, not diagnostic, but it suggests Iris is feeling caught between competing pressures. That night, James sat Iris down at their kitchen table in Astoria with pizza neither of them had appetite for. His daughter picked at her slice, not meeting his eyes, until James finally asked the question that scared him. Baby, Mrs. Patterson says you've been sad at school. What's going on? Iris's shoulders hunched, small body trying to fold into itself. Kids say things. What kind of things? About you and Catherine. Madison's mom told her you're dating your boss, and it's wrong. That Catherine only likes you because you're handsome and young, that you're using her for money. The words spilled out in a rush, each one a small blade. And then other kids laugh and say our apartment is small and we don't have money like Catherine does. They ask if we're going to move to her fancy place and leave Brooklyn. They ask if Catherine's going to be my new mom and if I have to call her mom now. James felt rage and helplessness war in his chest. 8-year-old children repeating adult judgments, they didn't understand, weaponizing them against his daughter, who'd done nothing except have a father who fell in love with the wrong person according to office politics. First, you never have to call Catherine mom. She's not trying to replace your mother. Second, we're not moving unless you want to. This is our home. Third, he pulled Iris onto his lap despite her being almost too big for it. What grown-ups say about me and Catherine doesn't matter. What matters is whether we're happy and whether Catherine treats us with respect. Are we happy, sweetie? Iris was quiet for a long moment, then whispered words that broke his heart. I don't know. Sometimes I think yes, but then I get scared you'll lose your job or Catherine will leave and everything will fall apart. And I don't want to lose you, Daddy. You're all I have that stays. The fear in her voice that she might lose him clarified everything. James had been so focused on protecting Iris from external consequences that he'd missed how his own fear was teaching her that loving someone meant inevitable loss. That commitment was temporary. That people left when things got hard. I'm not going anywhere, Iris. Not your mom leaving, not work problems, nothing changes that. I'm yours forever. He held her while she cried, 8 years of accumulated abandonment fear finally finding release. When the tears slowed, he made a decision. How about tomorrow Catherine comes over for dinner, just the three of us? We talk about this honestly. You get to ask any questions you want, no matter how hard, and we figure out together what happens next. Iris nodded against his chest, and James texted Catherine with hands that shook slightly. We need to talk, all three of us. Can you come to Astoria tomorrow night? The response came within seconds. Of course, whatever you need. What time Friday evening? Catherine arrived at James's apartment in Astoria for the first time, and he saw her take in the modest space with its worn furniture and Iris's drawings covering the refrigerator and the general lived-in chaos that came from a single father doing his best. If she judged the gap between her Upper West Side penthouse and his two-bedroom rental, that it didn't show on her face. She'd brought Thai takeout and ice cream for after understanding somehow that this conversation needed comfort food. They sat at the small kitchen table where James had eaten 1,000 meals with Iris, and the intimacy of having Catherine in this space felt both right and terrifying. Iris picked at her pad thai, not making eye contact until Catherine spoke with careful gentleness. Iris, your dad said you've been having a hard time at school. Kids saying things about us. Iris nodded, still not looking up. I'm sorry, that's not fair to you. None of this is your fault. Catherine waited until Iris finally raised her eyes. Can I tell you something honest? Even if it's hard. Okay, I'm scared too. Not of the same things you are maybe, but scared. I'm scared your dad will decide I'm too complicated. Too much risk, not worth the trouble. I'm scared you'll never trust me because your mom left, and why should I be different? I'm scared I'll mess this up and hurt both of you. Catherine's voice stayed steady despite the vulnerability. But here's what I know for sure. I'm not going anywhere unless you and your dad tell me to go. I'm fighting for this. For us. Because what we have matters more than what other people think. Iris absorbed this, then asked the question James had been dreading. Do you love my dad? Catherine didn't hesitate. Yes, very much. Why, he's not rich like the men you dated before. He doesn't have a fancy job. We don't live in a penthouse. The questions came out challenging, testing, needing to understand what made them worth choosing. I love your dad because he sees me. Not Catherine Hayes, the CEO, just Catherine who makes tea at sunrise and gets lonely and doesn't always know how to be human instead of professional. He makes me want to be better, kinder, more honest, less afraid. Catherine leaned forward slightly. And I love you because you're smart and careful and you protect the people you love fiercely. You don't trust easy, but when you do trust, it's worth everything. Your dad taught you that. It's one of the things that makes him extraordinary. Iris studied Catherine for a long moment, and James held his breath, waiting for verdict. Then his daughter asked the question that cut to the core. If you marry my dad someday, would you want me or would I be in the way? Catherine's eyes filled, and she blinked rapidly. Iris, you could never be in the way. If I'm lucky enough that your dad wants to marry me, and you're willing to let me be part of your family, then I get both of you. That's not a burden. That's everything I didn't know I wanted until I met you both. You'd really want to be like my stepmom. Iris's voice held doubt mixed with desperate hope. I'd want to be whatever works for you. Stepmom if that feels right. Friend if that's better. Someone who loves your dad and thinks you're amazing and wants to be part of your life, however you'll let me. Catherine reached across the table, not quite touching Iris, but offering connection. We don't have to decide everything tonight. We can figure it out as we go. But I promise you this, I'm not your mom, and I'm not trying to be. She's irreplaceable. I'm just someone who cares about you and your dad and wants to show up for you both. Is that okay? Iris looked at James seeking permission or guidance. He gave her a slight nod, your choice, baby, and watched his daughter take a breath that seemed to carry 8 years of weight. Okay, you can stay for ice cream, and maybe, she paused, gathering courage, maybe you could come to my soccer game next week if you want. I would love that. Catherine's smile broke through with genuine warmth. What position do you play midfielder? I'm not the best, but I'm pretty good at passing. Coach says I see the field well. Pride crept into Iris's voice. Sounds like your dad. He sees patterns other people miss. Catherine caught James's eye across the table, and the gratitude in her expression made his throat tight. They finished dinner and moved to ice cream conversations, shifting to safer topics: Iris's school project about ocean currents, Catherine's recent disastrous attempt at learning to paddleboard, James's discovery that his coffee maker had been broken for 3 days and he'd been drinking brown water. The laughter felt earned after the tears, and when Catherine left around 9, Iris gave her an awkward half-hug that lasted 3 seconds but meant everything. After James tucked Iris into bed, his daughter caught his hand. Daddy, I think maybe Catherine's okay. Like really okay, not just pretending. Yeah, baby, I think so too. Are you going to marry her? The question landed with unexpected force. James had been avoiding thinking that far ahead, focused on surviving the immediate crisis without considering what came after survival. But Iris's direct question demanded direct answer. Maybe, someday, if she wants to and you're okay with it, would you be okay with it? Iris thought about this with her usual seriousness. If you love her and she loves us and she's not going to leave, then yeah, I'd be okay. But Daddy, her grip on his hand tightened. Don't marry her unless you're sure, because if she leaves after you marry her, it'll hurt worse than Mom. And I can't watch you hurt like that again. James kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by his daughter's capacity to protect him while still being a child herself. I promise I won't marry anyone unless I'm absolutely sure. Deal. Deal. But lying in his own bed later, James stared at the ceiling and realized Iris had planted a seed. Marriage meant commitment that outlasted corporate politics in board investigations. It meant choosing each other publicly, permanently, in ways that made backing out nearly impossible. And maybe that's exactly what they needed, a declaration so binding that fear couldn't override it. He texted Catherine. Iris asked if we're going to get married. She said she'd be okay with it if we're sure. Are we sure? The response took 5 minutes that felt like hours. Then I'm sure I love you. I'm sure I want to build a life with you and Iris. I'm sure I don't want to imagine my future without you both in it. Whether that means marriage or just committed partnership or something else, we should talk about it. Together. When you're ready, James typed, I'm ready, not tonight, not next week, but soon. Let's talk about this. Catherine. Okay, soon. I love you, James. I love you too. Summer passed in gradual healing. The enhanced oversight period ended in June with Dr. Patricia Moore's final report confirming James had exceeded all performance expectations. The ethics training concluded. Derek's departure became old news, replaced by newer office drama. Catherine's board seat stabilized as Q2 earnings beat projections and client acquisition hit record levels. Slowly the weight lifted and they began to imagine a future that didn't require constant defensive positioning. Iris's soccer season ended with her team winning their division, and Catherine attended every remaining game, cheering from the sidelines in jeans and Hayes Capital branded fleece. The other parents noticed hard not to when a billionaire CEO showed up for 8-year-old recreational soccer, but Catherine's genuine enthusiasm for Iris's play made it difficult to sustain judgment. She learned the names of Iris's teammates, brought orange slices one week when it was James's turn, and asked intelligent questions about formations that revealed she had actually studied the sport to better connect with his daughter. In August, they took a weekend trip to the Catskills, first time all three of them traveled together. They rented a cabin with a telescope on the deck for Iris and spent days hiking trails where you could actually see stars at night. Watching Catherine teach Iris to identify constellations, seeing his daughter laugh without the weight of fear she'd carried for months. James felt something settle into place that he hadn't realized was misaligned. September marked a year since that midnight conversation about dating profiles. October brought decision. James had been circling for months, crystallized by a question Margot asked over Sunday dinner at her place in Dumbo. So when are you going to propose? You've been together a year, lived through hell and back. Iris is on board. What are you waiting for? James helped clear plates, dodging the question. Timing hasn't felt right. Timing never feels right. You make it right by choosing it. Margot fixed him with older sister authority that still worked despite him being 35. You love her. She loves you. You've proven you can survive crisis together. Stop waiting for perfect and start building permanent. The conversation stayed with him for days, accumulating weight until he made a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and overdue. He'd take Catherine to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the place where he used to bring Iris as a toddler, where he'd learned what unconditional love meant through scraped knees and tireless questions, and the simple act of showing up every day. It felt right to propose in a place that held that history, bringing Catherine into the foundation, rather than treating her as addition to something already complete. He enlisted Iris as co-conspirator, and his daughter took the role seriously enough to make him nervous. She wanted to hide in the bushes with a camera to capture the moment. She had opinions about what ring Catherine would like. Not too flashy, Daddy. She's not a flashy person. Something elegant. She practiced not giggling when they tested different ways for her to appear, after the proposal settling on casual walk-by like she'd been in the park all along. The ring came from a small jeweler in Queens who'd made his father's wedding band decades ago. Simple platinum with a single diamond, elegant without ostentation, exactly the kind of thing Catherine would wear. James spent a week's salary on it and didn't regret a penny. October 20th, exactly 1 year after their first real date, James texted Catherine to meet him in Prospect Park at 4. She arrived precisely on time wearing jeans and sweater against autumn chill hair, down no makeup, looking more like Catherine who made sunrise tea than Catherine Hayes, CEO. This is where you used to bring Iris. She looked around at the open field where families threw frisbees and dogs chased tennis balls. This is where I learned to be a father, where I figured out what actually matters versus what just feels urgent. James took her hand, led her to a bench overlooking the meadow. This is where I decided that protecting Iris meant building something stable and honest even when it was hard, even when it meant giving up things that seemed important but weren't. Catherine sat beside him, sensing something significant in the air. James, what is this? This is me remembering every choice that led here. To you. To us. He turned to face her fully, and his heart hammered hard enough that she probably heard it. A year ago, you asked me to help you fix your dating profile. You were lonely enough to risk honesty with someone who could have judged you for it. Instead, I fell in love with your courage, with the woman who makes pasta from scratch to quiet her mind, who reads 19th century novels because language matters, who showed up for my daughter's soccer games and learned constellations just to connect with an 8-year-old who didn't trust easily. James, Catherine's voice came out shaky. Let me finish. He slid off the bench onto one knee, feeling the damp grass soak through his jeans and not caring. We've been through investigations and board fights and Derek's political warfare. We've survived scrutiny and stigma and people telling us this was wrong. And I've learned something through all of it. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live with you, building something permanent that says we're not afraid of what people think because we know what we have is real. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, opened it to reveal the simple band catching October light. Catherine Alexandra Hayes, will you marry me? Not someday when it's convenient or safe or politically viable. Soon. As soon as you're willing. Because I'm tired of waiting for perfect and ready to build permanent. Catherine stared at the ring, then at him, and tears tracked down her face. Yes. God, yes. Absolutely yes. She slid off the bench to kneel with him in the grass, and they kissed while joggers ran past, and someone's golden retriever tried to join them. When they broke apart, laughing, Catherine held out her hand, and James slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. It fits perfectly. How did you? Iris helped. She measured one of your other rings when you left it at my apartment. James heard movement in the bushes and grinned. Speaking of Iris. His daughter emerged from hiding with Margot's phone held up, capturing video. I got the whole thing. Wait until Aunt Margot sees this. Then she ran to them, and they pulled her into a three-way hug, while strangers in the park applauded, and someone's child asked loudly why the grown-ups were crying. Are you happy, Daddy? Iris asked against his shoulder. Happier than I've been in years, baby. Good, me too. She pulled back to look at Catherine. Does this mean you're really going to be my stepmom? If you'll have me. Catherine's voice thick with emotion. Yeah, I'll have you, but can I still call you Catherine? Calling you Mom feels weird. Catherine is perfect. I wouldn't want you to call me anything else. Catherine caught James's eye over Iris's head, and the joy there was unguarded, no Ice Queen armor in sight. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, eating ice cream from a vendor and talking about logistics, when to tell the board, how to announce it, whether to have a big wedding or something small. Catherine wanted small, immediate family close friends, nothing that felt like performance. James agreed immediately, relieved she didn't expect the kind of society wedding that would turn their marriage into public spectacle. November became wedding planning, compressed into weekends between work and Iris's school schedule. Catherine hired a planner who understood that money could accelerate timeline without making things ostentatious. They chose Brooklyn Botanical Gardens Winter Greenhouse for January 40 guests, maximum intimate and beautiful without requiring the kind of preparation that took a year. The board found out when Catherine scheduled a brief meeting to disclose relationship status change per HR requirements. She entered the boardroom wearing her engagement ring for the first time at the office, and Howard Klein spotted it immediately. "You're engaged. As of 3 weeks ago, James Morrison proposed. We're getting married in January." Catherine's voice carried no apology, just statement of fact. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly before office gossip made it dramatic." Thomas Wright grinned openly. "Congratulations. About damn time." Julia Whitmore looked less pleased. "Catherine, the investigation only ended 6 months ago. Don't you think rushing into marriage creates exactly the kind of optics concerns we've been trying to avoid? We're not rushing, we've been together over a year. We've proven we can maintain professional boundaries and personal relationships simultaneously. The enhanced oversight found no issues." At what point does demonstrating compliance become enough? Catherine met Julia's skepticism head on. "I'm 42 years old. I'm not asking the board's permission to get married. I'm informing you as a courtesy and because disclosure policies require it. If that creates perception problems, I'm sorry. But I'm not postponing my life to manage other people's comfort." Margaret Townsend spoke up, voice warm. "I think it's wonderful. Congratulations, Catherine. You deserve happiness." The vote to acknowledge the disclosure, because apparently they needed to vote on whether to accept that their CEO was getting married, passed 5-2 with Julia and Robert Fitzgerald abstaining. Good enough. Catherine left the boardroom feeling lighter than she had in months. December brought unexpected friction when Catherine's mother, Eleanor, arrived from Pennsylvania for a visit. The tension between them had never fully healed after William Hayes's death, and Eleanor's first words upon meeting James in Catherine's penthouse were not encouraging. "You're younger than I expected." "How much younger?" 7 years, Mom." Catherine's voice carried warning. "James is 35. I'm 42. It's not scandalous. And he has a child from a previous marriage. You're aware of what you're taking on step-parent isn't easy." Eleanor studied James with the kind of scrutiny that made him feel evaluated for purchase. "You work for my daughter." "I work at Hayes Capital, yes. I report to the partnership committee, not directly to Catherine." James kept his tone respectful, despite wanting to defend against implications he could hear forming. "Convenient arrangement." Eleanor turned to Catherine. "I just don't want you hurt again, sweetheart. Marcus broke your heart. This man, no offense, isn't exactly your equal financially or professionally. What happens when he decides you're too much work? When the novelty of dating the boss wears off?" Catherine's face went cold in ways James had seen directed at Derek but never at family. "Mom, James is more my equal than anyone I've dated precisely because he doesn't care about my money or my title. He sees me. That's worth more than matching bank accounts. I'm only saying be careful. You're not getting any younger. If this doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out and I deal with it. But I'm not giving up on him because you're scared I'll get hurt." Catherine stood, body language making it clear the conversation was over. "James is going to be my husband. Iris is going to be my stepdaughter. You can accept that and be part of our family, or you can stay in Pennsylvania and judge from a distance. Your choice." Eleanor left the next morning, and Catherine cried in James's arms about mothers who couldn't let go of their own fears long enough to celebrate their daughter's happiness. He held her and understood that family wounds didn't heal just because you built a billion-dollar company or found someone who loved you despite complications. 2 days before the wedding, James woke at 3 in the morning with his heart racing and doubts flooding through every careful defense he'd built. This was insane. He was marrying his former boss, bringing Iris into a complicated blended family, betting everything that Catherine wouldn't wake up in 5 years and realize she'd settled for someone too ordinary when she could have had extraordinary. Rebecca's words echoed through his half-awake brain. "Our life is too small. I need more than this." He got up, paced his Astoria apartment, where he'd be moving out next week, to Catherine's penthouse, and felt panic close his throat. What was he doing? This was going to fail. She was going to leave. Iris was going to get hurt. He was repeating every mistake that led to the divorce, just with higher stakes and more public failure when it imploded. At 3:30, he called Catherine, despite the hour, and she answered on the second ring like she'd been awake too. "James, what's wrong?" "I'm freaking out. Tell me this isn't crazy. Tell me we're not making a catastrophic mistake." Silence on the other end. Then, "Meet me. Coffee shop on your corner, 20 minutes. They sat across from each other in a 24-hour diner that smelled like grease and desperation, both looking like they'd crawled from sleepless beds. Catherine reached for his hand across the sticky table. Talk to me. What are you scared of? Everything. That I'm not enough. That you'll realize you settled. That Iris will get attached and you'll leave and she'll lose another mother. The fears came out raw and unfiltered. Rebecca said our life was too small. What if I'm too small for you? What if in 5 years you wake up and think, why did I marry a guy from Queens who needed a scholarship to afford college? Catherine gripped his hand tighter. James, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. I had extraordinary. I dated CEOs and entrepreneurs and lawyers who clerked for federal judges. I had impressive resumes and perfect credentials and men who looked good on paper. None of them saw me. None of them made me want to be softer, kinder, more human. None of them loved my complicated life enough to fight through investigations and board politics and my mother's disapproval. But what if that's not enough long term? What if the reality of living with me and Iris? Stop, Catherine's voice went firm. You're spiraling, so let me spiral with you. I'm scared too. I'm scared you'll resent me when work gets hard and we have to maintain boundaries. I'm scared Iris will never fully trust me because I'm not her mom and never will be. I'm scared I'll mess up parenting because I have no experience. And you'll realize I'm terrible at the domestic stuff that comes naturally to you. I'm scared we'll wake up in 10 years and wonder why we worked so hard for something that turned ordinary. She leaned across the table. But here's what I know: every relationship worth having is scary. Every commitment worth making requires risk. We can spend our lives protecting ourselves from pain, or we can be brave enough to build something that might break us if it fails. I choose brave. I choose you. I choose Iris. Even scared, I choose us. James felt tears prick his eyes, exhaustion and relief mixing. I choose us too. I'm just terrified of screwing this up. Then we'll screw it up together and figure out how to fix it. Catherine smiled, and even in the harsh diner fluorescence, she looked beautiful. That's what marriage is, right? Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose imperfections you're willing to navigate forever. When did you get so wise about relationships? Yesterday, you were asking me to fix your dating profile. I had a good teacher. He told me that people fall for honesty, not resumes. I'm just following his advice. She stood, pulled him up. Come on, we're getting married in 2 days. Let's go home and sleep so we don't look like disaster at our own wedding. They walked back to his apartment through pre-dawn Brooklyn, and James felt the panic recede into something manageable. Fear was normal. Doubt was human. Choosing to marry someone anyway because they were worth the risk, that was brave. And maybe brave was all they needed. The wedding happened on a Saturday morning in January with 40 people who actually mattered. Brooklyn Botanical Gardens' winter greenhouse created a jungle against the frost outside, and Iris stood between James and Catherine in a blue dress, holding the rings, while Thomas Wright, ordained online specifically for this, officiated with humor and genuine warmth. James's vows were simple. I promise to see you, to show up, to choose you and Iris every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, to build a life big enough for all of us, even if other people think it looks small. Catherine's carried more weight. I promise to fight for us, to never let fear or judgment make our decisions, to love you both with everything I am, even the parts that don't know how to be soft, to remember that success without connection is just accomplishment, and you two taught me what connection means. Then Iris read a poem she'd written for school that morning, voice clear despite nervousness. A family isn't just people who share blood. It's people who choose each other, who show up when it's hard, who stay. We're a family because we chose, and choosing is braver than just being born into something. The words made half the guests tear up, and when Thomas Wright pronounced them, Mary James kissed Catherine while Iris cheered louder than anyone. The reception happened in Catherine's penthouse, their penthouse now, though James still felt strange claiming ownership of a place that could hold his entire Astoria apartment 3 times over. Food was excellent, speeches were mercifully short, and when Catherine and James had their first dance to a song, Iris had helped pick his daughter cut in halfway through, and they danced together, all 3 of them, while Margot captured photos that would sit on the mantle for decades. Howard Klein found James during dessert, pulled him aside with a look that suggested CEO to analyst rather than wedding guest. Take care of her. She's brilliant, but she needs someone who reminds her to be human. You do that. Don't stop. I don't plan to. James glanced across the room where Catherine laughed at something Thomas Wright was saying, her face open and unguarded. She makes me braver. I make her softer. It works. Good, because the board needs her sharp, but she deserves to be happy too. You give her both. Howard clapped him on the shoulder. Welcome to the family, Morrison. Try not to let her work too late. Later, after everyone left, and it was just the three of them in the quiet penthouse, Iris fell asleep on the couch surrounded by wedding favors. James carried her to her new room, bigger than anything in Astoria, decorated with her telescope and shark posters and the careful accumulation of 8-year-old treasures. He tucked her in while Catherine watched from the doorway. She's ours now, Catherine whispered. That's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Welcome to parenting. It doesn't get less terrifying, just more worthwhile. James joined her in the hall and they walked to the master bedroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan in lights. Are you happy, deliriously? Catherine pulled him close and they swayed slightly, like they were still dancing. Thank you for being stubborn enough to fight for this, for not running when it got complicated. Thank you for asking me to fix your dating profile. Best mistake you ever made. Best decision I ever made was working late that Thursday. Everything that matters came from that moment. She kissed him, and James tasted champagne and the future they'd built from midnight honesty and refused to abandon when it got hard. 1 year later, they sat in the same penthouse kitchen on a Saturday morning, the kind of domestic scene James had stopped believing was possible for him. Iris did homework at the counter, while Catherine made pancakes and James read the financial news on his tablet. The rhythm felt earned rather than natural, built through a year of negotiating step-parent boundaries and work-life balance, and the 1,000 small compromises that made cohabitation possible. Iris looked up from her math worksheet with a question that carried weight. Dad, can I ask something? Always. Are you happy? Like really happy, not just pretending for me? James set down his tablet, recognizing the echo of a conversation from 2 years ago when everything felt uncertain. Yes, baby, really happy. Why? Because my friend Madison says her parents pretend to be happy, but they actually fight all the time. And I wanted to make sure you and Catherine aren't pretending. She glanced between them. You're not right. Catherine turned from the stove, spatula in hand. We fight sometimes. About whose turn it is to do laundry, about whether your dad needs to work late again, about whether I'm spending enough time away from the office. But we're not pretending happiness. We're building it, which is different. Good, Iris nodded, satisfied. Because I like it here. I like having a family that isn't just me and Dad. Even when you make me eat vegetables. Vegetables are non-negotiable. Catherine plated pancakes with authority. But I'll take the compliment about family. James's phone rang. Howard Klein. He answered with the wariness that came from knowing board chairs didn't call on Saturday mornings unless something had detonated. Morrison, sorry to call on the weekend. Need to discuss something with Catherine. Is she available? We're having breakfast. What's this about? Succession planning, again. But not the Derek kind, the real kind. Howard's voice carried a weight that made James's stomach knot. Some board members are pushing for Catherine to name a COO who could eventually take over CEO role when she's ready to step back. They want to discuss it at next month's meeting. Can you give her a heads up? James looked at Catherine, who'd clearly picked up on his tone. I'll tell her. Thanks for the warning. He hung up and delivered the news while Iris ate pancakes obliviously. Catherine's face cycled through irritation and resignation before settling on grim acceptance. They'll never fully trust me. Even after everything, there's always going to be another test. But then she looked around the kitchen, James, Iris, the life they'd built, and something softened. You know what? Let them discuss it. I'll name a COO, start building real succession framework, prove I can plan for the company's future beyond my tenure. Because I have other priorities now besides defending my position forever. She crossed to James, kissed him in front of Iris, who made exaggerated gagging sounds. Whatever they throw at us, we'll handle it. Together. Together, James agreed and meant it. The phone call had felt like threat, another battle to fight. But looking at Catherine, his wife partner, The woman who'd been brave enough to ask for help and wise enough to choose connection over control, James realized they'd already won the war that mattered. Everything else was just maintenance.